Yeah, I mean, there's a limit to whatever they say, whatever the transportation board says, any changes on Route 9 have to go through the state, and I think that before they get into any detail, they're gonna want to hear, what the state has to say, what MassDOT has to say. Okay, we have one, two,
You could get 6.
four. I'd like to have one more, but are you, we're waiting for a couple of people who may come over from the capital subcommittee of the advisory committee, or at least one, but I don't want to wait too long. Well, let's give it one more minute, and then we'll go.
Well, let me ask Meredith another question while we're waiting.
Yeah.
Is there any money left in your budget for additional exploration by the transportation consultants? Or is that it?
So that we are at the end of our scope of work for the transportation study work.
So the possibility, because as you know, there's been a fair amount of undercurrent about proposing to amend the zoning to eliminate for now Chestnut Hill North. And
You're
what
talking about
I
the transit-oriented sub-district?
yeah,
The,
whatever.
transit.
The Tom sub-district.
There you go.
And so my question is, if that were to happen, how would that impact the overall transportation or traffic projections? Would that improve things? I mean, you do begin to address the Hammond Street problem, right?
Well, the Kittelson's projections assume full development of the entire district.
I know. So I'm wondering if you remove a piece of the district, does that change anything or?
It might change it marginally, but that's the minor piece of the whole, that's a pretty small piece of the whole picture for both traffic and the traffic may be there as a consequence of development along the whole stretch, but the amount of traffic that's going to be generated from whatever gets done, if anything ever gets done, where CVS and the gas station are, is relatively small.
But I don't think well, I don't know that. I mean, you're the transportation guy. I'm a layperson. My feeling is if you got 4 sub-districts, if you get rid of 2 of them, there's got to be some sort of impact on traffic and car trips or projected increase in car trips. So,
but I guess sorry, just to better understand the question, I get where you're going with this. What I had heard was this suggestion that the transit-oriented sub-district be removed temporarily within the context of this rezoning discussion and this town meeting discussion, but eventually there would be, you'd come back to rezoning it. I think there's sort of the suggestions once WS is ready. So like either way, I think if we're going to model this area, it would make sense to assume some level of development in the transit-oriented sub-district and to remove it and then make assumptions that like maybe the traffic would improve, I think would be misleading, given that I think people seem on board with still rezoning that area eventually, right?
I don't know. I'm not going to be here when that happens, so
well,
I'm not going to have
likewise.
I'm not going to have a voice.
Likewise, but just the same, it's that segment is in terms of the overall of the whole stretch of all the way from really Hammond Street all the way to the Newton City line. The whole stretch is far greater in terms of its traffic impact, development along the whole stretch, than unless we built a 100-story building on that site. It's just not the sort of taking it out doesn't have that much of an impact.
Okay. What I was thinking of is it does have an impact on Hammond Street to the north of Route 9.
Yes, certainly.
Maybe not to the south. That's what I had in mind.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be quiet now.
Okay. All right. And then, so let's get started with our meeting. So the meeting is being recorded. Welcome to the Chestnut Hill Commercial Area Study Committee Advisory Group meeting for March 25th, 2026. We have a couple of really interesting things to discuss tonight. One of them is, excuse me, one of them is transportation and traffic and the transportation board's um, comments. And then the other is that we have a proposal for amending, well, actually two other. We have a proposal for amending the zoning in order to conform to some what I would characterize as relatively marginal changes requested by the growth companies. And those were presented at the Economic Development Advisory Board last week. Yeah, last week. And then we have similarly something that's very, very interesting that Janice Kahn came up with for trading, basically trading height for increased commercial development. And Janice, if you're comfortable with it, I'll let you introduce that when we get to it. But I think that's really very, very interesting, and I'm hoping that we'll all pay close attention to that. So let's begin with what I think will be the easier and the shorter piece of this, the Transportation Board study. Meredith, you want to lead us into this?
Sure. Thank you. So this meeting came together last minute. Thank you everyone for making time in your schedules. I know this is a super busy time of the year, and to squeeze in another night meeting is no small feat. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I did not have the chance to prepare like a slide deck presentation, but there is sort of a supplemental reference document packet that was circulated and that I added a couple of things to just for reference, and don't feel obligated to go and read through everything. I'd be happy to walk through the contents of that if people think that would be helpful. But I'd say the primary motivation for reconvening the community advisory group was the select board had suggested, given some of the substantive changes that were incorporated into the zoning that's now on the special town meeting warrant for May, that the community advisory group, be updated on that, and, talk about any other relevant project updates. So the growth companies had submitted a concept for a redevelopment proposal in late February as we were finalizing the zoning. And as the select board was considering the zoning proposal and whether to advance that to Springtown meeting, growth companies raised some remaining concerns that they had, and they felt that there were certain aspects of the zoning that would make it really difficult for them to utilize the overlay zoning, and asked for some accommodations. So members of the select board and the community economic development advisory board got involved, had some conversations with growth companies. There, was discussion about reasonable compromises that could be incorporated into the zoning. And so ultimately the select board, with the review and approval of the Economic Development Advisory Board, accepted those changes, and that's what's currently on the warrant. So I have, we could do this two ways. We could do a track changes view of the zoning, and I could show you where the key changes are. There are a handful of them. Or we could sort of scroll through the cover memo that we had sent to growth companies, summarizing their requests and kind of where we landed in terms of accommodating them. Do people have a preference for track changes? Show of hands.
Janice?
Janice, you're muted.
Yeah, so I have a question. So I was hoping that people could make comments at this meeting. I noticed that Lou Edgers, who wrote a considerably long peer review of the transportation work that was done. And I see that he's here, and I'm just wondering if you said that we would do the traffic first, transportation first, and then go into the zoning. I'm just wondering if you are planning to have any comments on that, on the traffic.
Well, we always, yeah, I mean, we always have a public comment period, but Lou did quite an extensive review. And I think, uh, you know, if Lou, if you'd like to comment on what your analysis is of the transportation study, that would be very welcome.
Yes, I would like to comment, and I'll be happy to do it whenever you want me to.
Okay, Meredith, I think what perhaps a sensible thing to do is let's go through the growth companies piece of it. I don't think that will take terribly long, and then come back to the transportation. Is that, since we're already we're already embarked on the.
Sure.
that. And
Okay.
then in terms of how to review it, I think the easiest thing is to look at the list of the letter that was sent back to the growth company, so that we
Okay.
can, that really highlights the specific changes.
Okay. Sounds good. I will increase this so people can see this. So this was a response letter that staff put together after we were forwarded the redevelopment concept that growth companies had shared. Scrolling through. So I'd say the most substantial change that was made in the zoning was that we built in some flexibility in scenarios where it's a phase redevelopment, and to meet the minimum commercial requirement, the commercial space is either divided between the buildings, or the second building is a key component of fulfilling the minimum commercial requirement. So our concern was that developers would build the residential piece and not follow through with the commercial. And we were very concerned about that potential outcome, given the study objectives and the purpose of the zoning. So in the zoning with the EDAP subcommittee, we really tried to craft the language so that there was, a significant amount of protections for the town, that if you were going to move forward with this phased redevelopment, in order to meet the minimum commercial requirement, you had to provide evidence of financing and evidence of breaking ground before you were issued your certificate of occupancy for the first building, let's say the residential building. And so we were kind of holding the certificate of occupancy hostage until we had reasonable assurance that they were going to follow through with meeting the minimum commercial requirement. So that was a challenge for growth companies, because they really felt that they, wouldn't be able to do both buildings in quick succession. They were going to need several years in order to get that commercial building off the ground. I added in the packets the concept that growth companies presented, but in general, they're proposing a, like 5 or 6 story medical office building on the Tully Street lot, and then a 4-story residential building directly behind their commercial properties facing Boylston Street, but the residential building would face on to Heath Street, and there would be a lot of parking sort of in the interior of the property. And they would build the residential building first, and then the commercial building on the Tully Street lot. So what we did is we added into the zoning that for projects of a certain size, that the requirement for the evidence of financing and breaking ground could be waived through an agreement with the select board. And then they'd have up to 5 years, for the, to fulfill those requirements. Why I'm excited about this addition, I think this is a really good outcome, is that we now have 2 places in the zoning that kind of serve as these placeholders, where the select board would be in a position to broach a conversation about a memorandum of agreement if growth companies ever decided to move forward with utilizing this overlay district. We wouldn't be able to enter into an MOA with them at this point, given that they don't currently control or in the process of assembling a lot of the properties that are contemplated, particularly for the Heath Street residential building. So I think this is a really good outcome for the town, and Economic Development Advisory Board felt comfortable with this adjustment, even though it sort of would undercut some of the original intent of, adding protections in for the town.
Meredith,
So-
why not the planning board and the select board? The planning board's much closer to stuff like this than the select board is.
So that's true. I mean, I guess the select board could always ask for consultation from the planning board, but ultimately the select board would be the entity that's in the position to enter into a memorandum of agreement, and the planning board would not. And sort of enter into this negotiation with the developer. The planning board doesn't have the authority to do that.
Right, but they have the expertise in
So-
these types of things.
Yes, so
That's true. We have a very large number of boards with expertise in specific areas, and the select board typically will go to one or more of those boards for input. And I would expect that they would do the same thing. Are you suggesting that be in, reference to the planning board be in the language?
Yeah, I'd say if I were writing this, I'd say the select board in consultation with the planning board, but that's just me.
Right. All right, that's good input. Thank you. I want to make sure that everybody understands what the significance of this is in terms of, there were a couple things. One is we have we have a more definition around what the growth companies is thinking about. There were some small changes in setbacks that they requested that, to accommodate the peculiar space of the Tully Street lot, peculiar situation of the Tully Street lot, but this is really the heart of the change that was made. So any comments or questions on this would be certainly apropos, appropriate. And
we'll move on to some of the other points. So one of the concerns, which was already addressed in the zoning, is that because we are very mindful of not wanting to preclude development on the Tully Street lot, that across the rest of the zoning overlay, your development has to be on contiguous lots under common ownership. But in the 4.0 sub-district, there is, under the definition of project, the exception that you can include a project that includes non-contiguous lots. So this means that growth companies would be able to redevelop the Tully Street lot, along with any other plans that they have on the east block in the 4.0.
so
yeah.
so my understanding of that is that one of the advantages from their perspective is that allows them to batch together the commercial development on Tully Street with the residential development in order to achieve the 51% requirement.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes. So they also had some concerns about the 25-foot minimum setback along Heath Street. This setback was something that I think we discussed pretty extensively in the community advisory group meetings about the importance of buffering Heath Street as much as possible from the new redevelopment. And, we'd applied this 25-foot setback along Heath Street for the entire 4.0 sub-district. But what we did to, acknowledge growth companies' concerns is that in the zoning, the 4.0, there are some distinctions in terms of the setback requirements for the east block and the west block. So we just added the flexibility that on the east block, there was the potential to reduce the 25-foot minimum setback requirement by special permit. But that flexibility does not exist on the west block. So in terms of city realty, they would not have the flexibility to reduce that minimum 25-foot setback.
All right. Comments on that?
I see Janice has her hand up.
Janice, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So this I think tracks really well with Carla's previous comment, because special permitting is a whole different area. That's planning board and ZBA. And so I really think Carla's comment deserves really serious consideration, since you are now adding the planning board at this level, it makes sense to also put it above.
Well, okay. I mean, this is talking about, the potential for some flexibility in when a developer would need to follow through on the minimum commercial requirement with the negotiation with the select board. And the select board's the only entity that would be empowered to enter into that negotiation. But the planning board, in terms of, relief from setbacks and special permit requirements, like that's very much within planning board's purview.
Right.
We're talking about setbacks.
And the other thing that's worth noting is that there are a number of other places in the setbacks, where the planning board has the option to provide some level of relief through special permits. So this is adding one more case to that whole series of conditions that already exist.
Okay.
And then there were also concerns about, just given how narrow the Tully Street lot is, they had some concerns about, this was the setback requirements on the Tully Street lot. So I think that this was already something that was contemplated in the zoning, and it's a 10-foot minimum setback on Tully Street, which can also be reduced by special permit. So their concern was already addressed in the zoning. And then they had a request about, we had a minimum floor-to-floor height of 10.5 feet, which they wanted reduced to 10 feet to accommodate the several levels of parking that they were proposing for the interior of their site. We were able to accommodate that, add that in. And I feel like I'm forgetting one. Do we miss one? Oh, no, I think
That's it, yeah.
that was all of them.
All right. So these are, I think, useful from the town's perspective. It appears that they're useful from growth company's perspective. And unless there are concerns about them, let's move on to talk about the transportation study. Carlos, go ahead.
Yes, I see that there was the one about the floor-to-floor height.
Yep.
Which we haven't discussed. What was the reason for the 10.5 floor height requirement?
I think, well, we had 15 feet as the minimum for the ground floor commercial or ground floor. And then the 10.5 was sort of a compromise number. I think like the preference was,
We're talking about 12 originally, I think.
yeah, 12 or 11.
Yep.
And so I think we came down to 10.5 is something kind of more reasonable to provide some flexibility.
Yes, but I understand the ground floor. The other floors, was it flexibility for converting? I guess from office to residential, or what was?
No, are you asking why the 10-foot is requested rather than 10.5?
I was asking why there was a requirement above the ground floor.
Honestly, I don't think I can answer that question.
You mean, are you asking, Carlos, why we would specify any floor-to-floor height above the ground floor?
A minimum, yes.
I think in thinking about the number of stories that would be allowed within the heights that we were targeting, it's a very good question, Carlos. This was sort of something that we decided quite a while ago in the zoning development, so I can look back at my notes and get back to you with an answer on that.
Yep.
Okay, because normally I would understand, the minimum for the ground floor so that we can create a retail environment.
Mm-hmm.
The floors above, if it's commercial versus residential, there are different floor heights, but, if they're never, 10 is pretty low when you start thinking about all the stuff that you have to put in there. So,
Oh, totally. Sorry, just to that point, the 10-foot minimum requirement is only applicable to garage and structured parking.
It's
It
10
doesn't
and a half
apply to
for
other
everything
uses.
else.
okay. Yeah, I
Right.
just didn't understand why where anything above the ground floor was there. So if you can get back to me, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Blair? You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I was just gonna make a build on Carlos's comment. I don't know why you need it. I think we should trust that the developer has the interest in it. And it just seems superfluous in this situation. It seemed to be there doesn't seem to be any goal here that is town related. It's really about feasibility of construction, and a developer would figure out for themselves that 11 feet works better, or 12 feet works better, or 10 feet works better. I don't think we need to have a dog in this show.
Okay, thank you. All right, now
MJ.
let's go back to the transportation study. Now you all would have received it in the packet, received comments from.
Sorry, Mike, I had one last question,
Go ahead.
and I don't know where this fits. So I'm just going to ask it here because it has nothing to do with transportation.
Yeah.
How many, for example, for the Cedar Realty project, how many building permits are we assuming would be sought after? Because I get the impression in some of the language or some of the answers to questions and all that it's a single building permit. But yesterday at the building commission, the building department's budget review, this question was placed to the building commissioner, and he said, no, it would never be one single building permit. It would be three. If there's three buildings, three addresses, three different building permits, they're all independent of each other, and they're all opened and closed as the project goes along. So I wanted to make sure that reality jived completely with all the other, the rules and the memorandum that were added regarding CFOs, schedule, all that stuff. When it is not a single building permit, but three of them. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't necessarily need a response, but I think it needs to be addressed at one point.
It's hard for me to imagine the three buildings will be starting at three different times for one thing. But so you would think that pretty building one at a time. But Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I would add, Carlos, is that there's a distinction between the special permit and the building permits, right? The special permits are issued by the ZBA, the building permits are issued by the building department. And so, Cliff can actually probably speak to this better than I can, but the definition of a project, which refers to an application, might have a single permit for the entire, a single special permit for the entire project. But then as it goes through phase development, then you would have separate building permits for the different buildings.
And that was the case with Hancock Village.
Right.
Each
Bobby,
structure has they get their own certificate of occupancy as they're completed, and that means that they have to have a building permit that gets closed out.
Bobby, is that correct? Because as you know, you submit your building permit and then it gets denied and it gets passed on, through the whole process. So if you could just, since you've done many of these, can you just clarify that that's the case?
That would be the case. It'd be a special permit for the entire property, and then there'd be three different building permits for each building. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't happen that way.
And I would also just add that we have had multiple rounds of conversations with building department staff going line through the zoning to make sure that there was consistency in terms of all of the language we were using and that the process made sense to everyone. So.
Great, thank you.
Okay. And now back to transportation. Is Lou still here? Okay, Lou, good. Lou, I think maybe the way to proceed with this is to ask people if they have any, well, your letter was distributed. Let's let you make your comments about your analysis, and then if we have questions and we want to refer back to the Kittleson study, we can do that.
Okay, you still want me to lead off?
Yeah, if that's all right.
Okay, great. My name is Lou Edgers. I live at 26 Craftsland Road. And I'm a professor emeritus of civil engineering. So when these Kittleson reports start coming through, I get attracted to them like a bee to honey. So I spent quite a bit of time going through the reports, and I've sent to you, and Meredith, thank you for distributing a 7-page summary of what I get from these reports. In the interest of time, what I'm going to do is just briefly read to capture some of the highlights of the document that I sent you. And so here goes. The first, and these are all I'm really extracting from the Kittleson reports. The proposed upzoning of the Chestnut Hill commercial area will overburden an area already from day one stressed by excessive traffic unless major mitigation strategies are implemented. The history of this, by the way, it goes back at least to 1948, when the state highway department recommended an overpass or an underpass at Route 9 Hammond Street, just as exists at Hammond Pond Parkway and all the way up going back to Route 9. And so the legacy we inherit right now is Brookline's decision not to follow through on that recommendation in 1948. The Kittleson report then goes through a very detailed traffic analysis and projects, I won't bother you with the detailed numbers, but projects by the design year 2046, traffic in this corridor is going to increase by at peak morning, peak evening by 342% in the morning, 399% in the evening relative to present peak traffic activities. That's enormous. That's 3.5 to 4 times increase of traffic in an area that's already stressed. The Kittleson report makes the point that signal improvements will provide little benefit at the key Route 9 Hammond Street intersection. Signal improvements will provide little benefit. And that's a really important point to take away. The Kittleson then goes on and talks about this critical intersection, Route 9 Hammond Street, and are you all familiar with this R-cut proposal, the R-cut scheme? I have trouble. Restricted crossing U-turns basically, as you're coming from the minor street, which is Hammond Street, you take a right, do a U-turn, and then move on. So it becomes very complicated. And that seems to be the Kittleson. They're very high on that. And I agree. The Route 9 Hammond Street R-cut alternative that they present is promising. But it presents lots of challenges that require further study. I mean, some of these challenges I think you're familiar with. It's going to introduce some additional queuing at U-turn locations on Route 9. I asked the basic question, simple question: is Route 9 wide enough to handle all of these additional U-turn lanes? And by the way, if it's wide enough to handle U-turn lanes, why not think more seriously, except for money, for an underpass or an overpass situation? The report talks a lot about improving bicycle and pedestrian safety performance. Well, I'm sort of in a show me stage about that. That would require detailed design, because this particular area is very uncomfortable, very unsafe for pedestrians and certainly for bicyclists. And I certainly have ridden my bicycle through here. And another obvious point is any changes that are going to be made at this intersection, as well as throughout the area, is going to require buy-in, write-in approval of Brookline, of Newton, and Mass DOT. The nightmare scenario is that the R-cut doesn't work, and it does something to help Route 9 traffic go through, but it creates major backup problems, which already exist on Hammond Street, and Hammond Street North, Hammond Street South. I mean, Carla's point at the beginning of the meeting related to that. And so if this R-cut produces queuing problems on Hammond Street, both north and south, then that could adversely affect traffic operations over a very, very large area as drivers seek to avoid the Route 9 Hammond Street Nightmare intersection. Think about that. The queuing problems on Hammond Street. And in my mind, I've just mentioned a few streets. The impact could go as far as Heath Street, as Woodland Road, Horace James Circle, Hammond Pond Parkway, Beacon Street to the north, because then people would travel on Heath Street North, Beacon Street, Hammond Pond Parkway, just to avoid this intersection. So my point being that the arc cut has promise, but it's high risk. So I'm going to keep it short. And I think you appreciate that the commercial area zoning proposal will have enormous traffic implications for generations and also for town-wide because it sets precedent. I mean, all you got to do is read Brookline News and see the many proposals for high buildings that are being brought forward. So I strongly urge this group to move deliberately and move carefully and considering how best to mitigate traffic impacts, because I think that's sort of the soft underbelly of this project. This where the most effects will occur in the area and the portion that requires the most mitigation. So thank you. I'll try to keep it short.
Thank you. That's a very good summary of what you've put together and of the risks, the concerns. And the only question I have is, where were you when I was chair of the transportation board and I needed skilled members?
It's probably in the Conservation Commission.
So that was a very interesting analysis. I think you're right. I mean, I've had my own concerns about the arc cut design, and there's a modification of it that I think would help a great deal. But I don't want to get into trying to design the traffic, the traffic solutions. But you're absolutely right, and you can be sure that that we have to be talking with MassDOT, and they're going to be very interested in trying to alleviate the problems that could arise. Certainly on Route 9, we have to be concerned about Hammond Street. You're absolutely right, and Woodland Road, and even now people come up northbound on Hammond Street. They turn right into Heath and then take a left turn on on Dunster in order to get to Route 9 instead of having to wait through that red light. So there's certainly a problem waiting to be solved already, and adding development will increase the size of that problem. Carla.
I was wondering whether anybody in the transportation staff had any comments about the Kittleson report.
So we worked in partnership with the Transportation Engineering Division on the Chestnut Hill Transportation Study. So we developed the scope of the work with them. They were at all of our meetings with the consultant Kittleson. We obviously deferred to the Transportation Engineering Division on, based on their subject matter expertise. And I think the conclusion is it's what Lou has pointed out, that it appears promising. I think we were hoping to come away from the with our conceptual improvements for intersection redesign options at Hammond Street and Boylston with a longer menu of options to choose from, because of the geometric constraints of the area, the reluctance to entertain any sort of land taking options. We ended up with the arc cut, which through our scope of work, is sort of the potential alternative redesign option. And we use the methodology that MassDOT, it's understanding MassDOT uses to develop their project concepts. So the short answer is, they provided the cover memo that was included along with the Kittleson phase 3 report. And I think that's, the scope of their comments. And we're hoping that we're going to have the opportunity to keep pushing forward on this work and gearing up for working group discussions with City of Newton. We've kind of already established a pattern of communication with that. But ultimately we need to also include the property owners and approach MassDOT and try to get them more engaged in these discussions, because I think we're limited in terms of the additional analysis we can do, given a lot of the uncertainty about how MassDOT is going to feel and what additional criteria they're going to apply to the intersection redesign.
I think it's, I've got three hands raised and I'll come back to you all in just a second, but um, I think it's worth saying that at least I would expect that Mass DOT will start to pay much more attention to this once the zoning is in place. Until then, there's a limit to how excited they're going to get about it. But they're certainly going to recognize that this is something they have to pay attention to once zoning is in place, and particularly the Chestnut Office Park development begins to go forward. So I had hands up in the
And
different
wait,
order.
can I just, I'm sorry, Mike, I had two more
You want
questions.
to finish, Carl? Go ahead. Yeah.
So in one of the reports, maybe it was the second one from Kittleson, there was talk of a traffic circle at Heath and Hammond Pond Parkway.
Right.
Has that gone away?
No,
So
so I wonder if I would characterize Kittleson's report as being somewhat of a textbook set of solutions that can't necessarily be lifted whole out of the textbook and plunked down into the streets of Brookline.
So also just to jump in about the, and Lou, I know in your memo you had talked about the quadrant option that was identified for Heath, and Hammond, which we officially did take off the table because of the implications for removing on-street parking, which is already something that there's not very much of in the area. And given the need to support the ground floor commercial as the area is redeveloped, we really need to retain as much of that on-street parking as we can. It's going to be fun. It's going to be difficult to find other places to add that. So we removed the quadrant option. So that's off the table. So in terms of intersection redesign, there's the Hammond and Route 9, and then technically still the traffic circle. But again, just even at face value with DCR, that would involve land taking. You know, how would that work with if DCR extends the bike path and the work that they've done north of Route 9 on Hammond Pond Parkway? So they're just, you know, at face value, that seems like a much more challenging intersection redesign to push forward.
So maybe I'm just too risk averse, but I don't see how town meeting can be asked to approve the zoning given the projected number of increased car trips that would result from a built-out area without having a reasonable assurance that there is some way to address the future traffic issues on a state highway that are already pretty serious. Because it's got to be in the interest of the developers to want to be sure that traffic is not going to be so awful that people are going to say, I'm just not going there. It's not worth it. You know, I'll go do my shopping or my eating at a restaurant that's easier to get to. I've got to be missing something here, but I just don't know
I guess
what it is.
yeah, the question is, do you try to solve, or at least in design terms, try and do a design on Route 9 ahead of zoning, or do you, because the design that you need is going to depend to some extent, or a large extent really, on what you do with zoning, or do you do the zoning and then on the basis that, well, now we have something that we can expect to happen over time and as a consequence of the zoning, and we have to design for that. I don't, you know, there is no simple solution that anybody's going to come up with to the traffic on Route 9. It's going to take something. I really don't want to get into the discussion of the R-cut thing, but it's going to take some thinking about how that might be modified, how the other intersections, they identify two other intersections that are serious issues, but certainly Hammond and Route 9 are the key. We're not done with that. We're nowhere nearly done, and it's going to take quite some time to work that out.
So you're confident that there will be something, though, that is going to help?
Something
Carl,
will
can I
help.
take a shot at answering your question? Mike, do you mind? I don't want to
go
jump
ahead.
in.
Yeah.
I would say this, Carla. I think there's a little bit of sort of a cart before the horse, and I couldn't agree with what you're saying more, right? Why would a developer want to spend all this money to build something if we're creating so much problem that nobody wants to go there, right? But what happens is all we're doing at this town meeting is authorizing a project, changing the zoning to allow for a certain project that could take place. But nothing else in the zoning bylaw is still there, right? This is still considered a major impact project. Major impact project requires us to go MEPA, DOR, DCR, all through the project, hire a traffic consultant, go through all this process, find mitigation. And listen, the passing zoning doesn't mean this building gets built. The passing zoning means we have the authority to move forward to try to build something, but we have to answer your questions. And we have to come up with a solution, just like any other major impact project in the town. A lot of times, and I've seen it many times, people like, my God, you're gonna have 10,000 square foot building? Well, 10,000 triggers DAT, and DAT means you're gonna end up changing the design, you're gonna end up changing the traffic, you're gonna end up, but you can't spend all this money now when it's not even, we don't even know if it's gonna happen yet. So the process comes after, really, and the project doesn't move forward if we're not able to answer the questions. I mean, listen, DOR, DOT is not gonna say, oh, yeah, fine, town meeting passed it, go ahead and build, we don't care about Route 9. I mean, this is it's a big deal, and we appreciate that, and believe me, that's why we've had conversations. We wouldn't get this far in the process unless we felt that we had an avenue with DOT and felt comfortable moving forward to know that we could get through the major impact process. So these questions will be answered, and I'm sure you'll be sitting there when we start going through the DOT process if we're lucky enough to get town meeting to approve it. So maybe that answers your question. I hope at least just gives you a little bit of comfort to say that there is a lot more to happen if town meeting were to approve this.
Okay, I'm going to take this in order of the hands that I see raised. Lynn Sweet, then Lou, and then Lou Edges, and then Carlos.
Good evening. I am Lynn Sweet. I live at 321 Hammond Pond Parkway in a 22-unit condominium that is just kind of outside of the shadow impact zone. I am definitely very late at getting caught up on this process, but now that I am a trustee, I've got to pay a little bit more attention. And I appreciate all of the work that everyone's done. I also happen to work in the development field as a development consultant. So I understand what everyone is saying about the chicken and egg problem. So I just want to say, a couple things. The only reason we moved to Chestnut Hill from the other side of Newton was because Route 9 was fixed at Chestnut Hill Square. Before it was fixed, I would not come to this area. So, that's kind of like the positive part of my conversation, that I think transportation planners can play a really important role. I am not at all familiar with the transportation planners report. I certainly would have a lot more comfort if I knew somebody like Jeffrey Dirk from Vaness or Bob Misha were involved with this, people that I know work on major highway systems and fix things. And I will also say that when I work on a rezoning, quite frankly, on behalf of a developer, we do try and do a lot of work up front to try and make everybody comfortable. A lot of times, a lot of the work is done before the zoning goes because of this chicken and egg kind of a problem. I really have no idea what is going to be happening at Hammond and Heath. That is just about right outside our door. I can tell you that if I need to go to Brookline Bank, now Beacon Bank, in the morning, it's a tough hoe to get from Hammond Pond Parkway onto Route 9, and often that intersection, even if it's not morning rush hour, as everybody knows, is globbed up. So I'm not saying whether I like the project or don't like the project. I'm a very big believer in development. I know that this is in a really important commercial area to the community. It looks like the downsizing has happened, a lot. And obviously nobody knows where the market is going these days, the real estate market. Over the last month, things have changed again, so it's hard to know if and when the zoning passes, what's going to be on there. So I do agree with trying to build as much flexibility into the bylaw, as possible. But I personally would like to see a little bit more on the traffic, so that I know that we can get out of our driveway in the morning and get around the community. So I appreciate your time and again, everyone's effort. This has been a long process. You've all put in yeoman's work.
Thank you. Lou, go ahead.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Good.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to comment on these things, but since they came up, I just make a very brief comment. And really, the sort of the theme is engineers have feelings. And my comments are regarding the quadrant solution that was considered in, I think, the Phase 2 report, and also the rotary at Hammond Street and Hammond Pond Parkway. Again, the quadrant solution, which required multiple turns to work your way through Hammond Heath, and then the rotary at Hammond Pond Parkway. And I'll be polite. I was polite in my review, and I'll remain polite. But I thought that that they were proposing those solutions means they were not only doing textbook things, Michael, as you suggested, but they're digging really deep when they make proposals of that sort to solve a problem. So they're digging deep, which says to me, these problems are not easily solved. They are huge, and they're huge in terms of policy and town decisions, and they're huge in terms of engineering. There are no simple solutions here.
Okay. I think we all agree with that. Carlos.
Yes, thank you, Mike. I wanted to follow up on what Carla was talking about. And I guess my comment is divided into two parts. One of them is going to be a metaphor. So basically what I'm hearing right now is, town meeting, say, for example, the town meeting is an owner of a house or something, and they're going to electrify everything. And they're basically saying, okay, yes, get an electric car, get electric heat pumps, electric stove, everything. Don't worry, you're going to get enough power from Eversource. And, it depends where you are, but you don't really, like, the typical owner would say, go to Eversource first, is like, can I get 400 amps from you, or am I going to have an issue before I do this investment? So basically what we're asking town meeting is, don't worry about the traffic. We'll resolve it later. We don't know, as Lou said, it's hard to know if we're actually going to resolve it. The second part to my comment, the second comment is actually for Bobby. I appreciate very much that this zoned area has one parcel with one developer, which is the largest developer and the largest parcel. But I think we're forgetting that the traffic is not only going to come from this parcel, it's also going to come from the growth that the rest of the upzoned area all the way to Hammond Street, and it's also going to come from the north side of Boylston Street, since since it's still there. So it's not just one project. It's actually what the original purpose of this committee was, which was to rezone a whole area of a whole neighborhood. And we're basically telling town meeting, ignore the traffic for now, just upzone it, and then we'll figure out how to solve it in a way that we can solve it. Because again, as we all know, there's so much fluid you can throw through that pipe before it doesn't work. So I'm a little, I'll go with the flow, but I'm a little skeptical about how town meeting. No, I think town meeting will go with it, but I'm just a little skeptical about how it will resolve itself in the next 10 years or so, because there's just not a lot of physical space to do much. So that's just my my follow-up for Carla's comment.
Right. We have to encourage everybody to get very small cars. Janice,
Mike and Janice, apologize. I have to chair a meeting on a different brooklinezoom.gov
Okay,
channel
Dave.
at 7:30. So thank you, Meredith and chairs and everybody else.
David, is there
Thanks, David.
something that you wanted to say before you leave, or?
No, I appreciate the discussion and all the work.
Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to make sure David had a chance to weigh in.
Yeah, no, I should have done that, but thank you.
No, of course. So, I wanted to respond to a couple of things that were said. First, for Lynn, and this is in Lou Edger's report. About a year before this, the Kittleson study was done of traffic. Van Ness did a study, I believe, in the area related to a different project. And Lou's analysis, I think, includes, compares the data from both of them, and they're not identical, even though they were looking at the same stretch of land. So Van Ness found that the intersections were worse than Kittleson came up with. So yes. So just so you know, there is another traffic study out there that you could look at, and if you contact me, I'll send it to you.
Meredith, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Janice, just to, and Lou, I knew that you had emailed, I think, back in the fall, raising this question, which we had the consultants look into, and I failed to follow up with you on this. But so regarding the discrepancy between the Kittleson report and the Van Ness report, so that is due to the fact that the Van Ness assumed that the existing lane configuration, where there isn't that right turn lane on Hammond Street onto Boylston Street because of the construction at 1180, was the permanent condition, which it's not. So ours assumed that, eventually 1180 will be done and the lanes will go back to the previous configuration. So that is the source of that discrepancy. So I apologize for not emphasizing that earlier on in these conversations.
Okay. Thanks, Meredith, for the clarification.
That's very
So,
helpful.
so the other thing I wanted to point out that we haven't actually talked about, we've talked about backups on Route 9, queuing on Route 9. So just to be clear, the neighborhood wants a successful commercial project or project, mixed use project. I mean, we don't want a failed project here either. So, I want to put that right out there. So one of the other queuing things that interests me, though, is also the internal queuing. You've got a pathway within the project to take cars through to the parking areas, to the different buildings. And so, I hope that you'll also take a look at the queuing capacity within the project as well, because getting onto Route 9, I think, is going to could prove challenging depending on how successful the project is, frankly. So I just want to point that up, that there's other queuing issues that need to be considered in terms of a successful project. So, thank you.
Okay, Carlos, your hand is still up, but I assume that that's just a leftover. There you go. Okay, thank you. All right, any other comments about the transportation side of this? Someday when somebody has a half an hour, I'd be happy to have a really interesting discussion about the R-cut thing, but I don't want to do it at this meeting. It has its good points and its bad. Let's go to what I think is really the most positive thing that I've heard in this in several in the last several meetings, which is Janice's suggestion for some changes in zoning in height allowances and tying them to the amount of commercial development. So, Janice, do you want to walk through what you've suggested, and then we have a
Sure.
marked up version of the zoning proposal?
Right. So I'll tell you where I began. So my goal was, I think the neighborhood as in general felt not as listened to as we had hoped. And so my goal was to recognize the upzoning that the neighborhood actually did come to consensus on, which was 10 stories. It's currently 6 stories. So to take that as a baseline, and work from there so that we can kind of balance feelings and also get work done, that, we understand the town's financial position and everybody's sort of goals here. So my goal was to sort of bring everybody together and up, raise everybody up. So I looked at the zoning, and it seemed that since the 5 town meeting members who are on the CAG wrote a letter to the select board agreeing to a 10-story height limit, which seemed to be a consensus also within the community, that we should use that as the base zoning. So right now, the way it was constructed, the base zoning was at the bonus height level, in my view. It was 12 stories. So I thought, well, let's start at 10 stories, which was the neighborhood consensus. And that's for 51% commercial. Right. You get 10 stories. But EDAB also had an interesting comment that I'd like to sort of focus on, not so much stories, but also heights. So 125 feet. Because people in general can understand feet rather than stories. So 125 feet equal to about 10 stories would become the base zoning. And then there would be bonus heights. So for 60% commercial, it could get an extra 25 feet or 2 stories. And then for 66% commercial, you could get up to 175 feet or the 14 stories. So it just adds another sort of, instead of just 2 levels, now there's 3 where the base zoning is at the level that has neighborhood consensus. And so the other piece to that is, I mean, we don't want an empty lot. That's not the goal of the neighborhood. We want to see a vibrant area. And so I also requested that that the bonuses sunset after 3 years or with an additional year that the select board could grant with a public hearing. I don't, clearly I'm not a developer. I know that there are economic challenges, particularly today. And if it proves untenable, we can adjust that at a future town meeting. But I'd like that to at least be a goal for the neighborhood and the developer and the town to make sure that something happens here. The other changes I suggested actually came from Ken Lewis, who's not here, who noticed that there was a provision that allowed for a buyout of, instead of putting a tree canopy in the open space between the buildings. And having grown up in New York City, I can say that in the summer, when it gets really hot, those kind of spaces you can't breathe and you can't comfortably walk on them. The paving is too hot and it's very uncomfortable. And so trees are an enormous benefit, again, for the vibrancy of the area and for people to actually come and enjoy the spaces. So we added some language to make sure that the trees were on the ground level, mainly because in the original plan at 20 stories, some of the trees were going to be on terraces or decks above the ground, but it's really important to have an on the ground canopy, I think, for the benefit of the public realm, which will be important in this project. So those are the elements, adding another level to the zoning and the bonuses, the tree canopy, making sure that it's not a buyout, but has to be present. And the hope that this gets going sooner rather than later.
Okay. Okay, now, Michael, do you want to make any comments about the discussions you've had back and forth? Michael Michael Rubinson
Sure.
has
I mean,
been doing
I'll
shovel
just talk a,
diplomacy, as he said.
yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about the process here, um, and then leave it to Cliff and Bobby to respond as they see fit and sort of clarify. So just so everybody is clear what's happened. So Janice originally made these proposals, the proposals regarding commercial percentage and height bonuses at the EDAB meeting. Has it been 1 week or 2 weeks now?
Time
Last
flies,
week?
but I think it was only
It
one.
was only last week. Okay.
Yeah.
And so since then, Janice has been working with Jonathan Simpson and myself to sort of get clarity on the complete set of changes, which is where the tree canopy piece rolled in, and I think there was one other minor change. And just today, we've gotten to the point of being able to convert that proposal into draft amendments, because we got a request from City Realty, understandably, that the thing that they would want to respond to would be what the actual changes were, so that there was clarity on that, that they were responding to something that was both clear and complete. So we got that today. It went to City Realty earlier this afternoon. So I know Bobby and Cliff have had a chance to look at it. I don't know if you're prepared to make a response, but we can take it from there. And then at that point, I'm continuing to work with Janice on the presumption, on the assumption and her assurance that coming to some agreement here we would try to come to some agreement that would bring along the P15, P14 delegations, and hopefully find some agreement to move this forward, that was reasonable for the neighbors, would get something built, which is all of our objectives, and be good for the town.
Okay, thank you. When you get done with that, you can go to the Middle East and do the
No, that one will be easier.
maybe. All right, Bobby or Cliff, either one of you want to make a comment. I'd like to, and Blair and Mark, I see your hands are up, and but let's wrap this a little bit further. Go ahead, Cliff.
Cliff did a deep dive, so I'll let him jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate getting the kind of the actual text because I wanted to make sure that we were seeing what was being proposed, but we're kind of prepared to respond to it because I would say that these are conversations that aren't necessarily new. This is the crux of the conversations the entire time. So I guess I would say that this is being, asked for further concessions and compromise over what we consider to be already the compromise that is the current zoning. Throughout this process, there's been a desire to say, there's been a recognition both through EDAB work and, other outside consultants that the level of density and the uses currently allowed on the site do not encourage development. Changes need to be made. What level of changes are necessary to actually allow for development? And that kind of we've come up with proposals, but throughout the question has been to us is, okay, well, what can you do? What is the level? How low can you go on height, and how high can you go on commercial to still have a viable project? Because I would say, throughout this 51%, this is a number that is far higher than current market would dictate. This is already represents a very high bar to clear for commercial environment, and similarly, 12 is a number that we see as really kind of the actual move the needle level of height. And I want and to explain that, I want to go back to something that's come out a lot through these conversations, but I do just want to reiterate it, is that once you get above a certain height, and for residential floor plates and heights, that's usually around 7 stories. For commercials, it's probably around 6, the current zoning. The build type changes from wood frame to non-combustible, which means steel or concrete. That comes with almost a doubling of the construction cost. And so the reason why when we say kind of what is the minimum you can get to, is really it is around 12 stories that the added costs begin to be made up for with the added density. 10 stories does not do that. So in that respect, a 10-story project is usually less valuable than a 7-story project. So this is why we bring this up, because it was generally agreed to and determined that 6 and 7 stories was not enough to spur development. And so the solution to that is not to allow for a building that is less valuable than the 6 or 7-story version of the project. That doesn't solve the problem. That just leaves the problem at the same point. And so similarly for the commercial percentage, 51% is already a very high minimum. There was put in incentives to say, hey, if the market is there and the demand is there, that you can do better than the minimum. There is incentives to push you to do better than the minimum, but you suddenly change what was previously an incentive number to now be the minimum, takes it from the realm of being a possibility if markets improve to you now need markets to improve to a point we haven't seen in a very long time for anything to be buildable whatsoever. So both of these proposed changes make things really difficult and basically puts us in a position where we have no path forward and we're reliant on phantom potential market changes to have a chance for anything to be built. What we have proposed in response and what we have been willing to work with is to say, okay, at a couple of meetings ago, there was a request to us of, can you tell us what it would look like if there was no option to go to 14, everything had to stay at 12, and the baseline became the maximum, and there was no more incentive program. We have been willing to engage with that. We have developed versions of the project that stay in that height. It would involve relocating almost all, if not all, of the parking to below grade and moving them from above grade levels to below grade levels. And that, to make up for that added cost, that would involve introducing more residential and bringing the project closer to the 51% threshold, probably in the 53 to 54% range. But that is the compromise we were willing to make. We were willing to say, fine, let's put a higher threshold to hit in order to take advantage of that 14-story, or if you want to remove it entirely, we can work on that, because honestly, if you put it at 65, 66%, that's such a high bar to hit that I can't see any project doing it. So I'm not going to fight to include it when there's no realistic chance it happens. So we're certainly willing to place a higher bar or remove the high end 14-story. But if you remove the baseline and cut out the floor from under us and drop everything to 10 stories, we don't have a project anymore and we can't move forward.
I wonder if I could ask for a little bit of clarification. I mean, my sort of wisecrack would be, well, should we buy Michael a ticket for the Middle East at this point and send him on to something else? But I realize that that's not really what you're saying here. At least that's not what I'm hearing. But where do you want to go next in terms of what you would like to see from the town side or from the neighbors? Or is that something you prefer to take offline and have that be a conversation? Let the diplomacy continue.
I mean, we would love to have diplomacy continue, and like I said, there are areas where we're happy to, where we can have discussions and work and create alternatives. But I want to be upfront about the hard reality and say that, I know, this 10-story has been picked as a choice. I mean, I think anyway, we've been very consistent in saying that 10 stories is not feasible. 10 stories is not enough to encourage development. I think that has been backed up by some of the EDAB meetings and their analysis as well. I'm sure you can find, other other people who will tell you similar things. So I kind of wanted, I'm happy to work with diplomacy, but I want to be clear about there's certain things we can work with, and there's certain things we can't. And it's not up to us, it's up to the market. And like, I can't control what construction prices are. I can't control how much more expensive steel is than wood. I only have to work within those constraints.
But the base becomes irrelevant if you have the ability to move to the level of commercial that is suggested for the two-story bonus, to go from 10 to 12. And so, any thoughts about whether the feasibility of that?
Well, I mean, like I said, that, yeah, you're in this case, you'd be changing what was an aspirational, kind of target to a bare minimum in order for anything to be built whatsoever. And removing of that flexibility is just, it's too much risk. And it would require, like I said, it would require almost a perfect level of commercial demand recovery to say that, yes, absolutely, it's 60 or 63% or nothing is just an untenable position to be in, because that's so, as we said, we have been 51% is a significant amount more than what the basic market would dictate based on. And throughout, we've been working with a compromise to go above what the market would do to reduce the value of the project by introducing more commercial, because we understand that it is necessary to meet the town's goals. But there's only so much we can give before it undercuts and the feasibility of the entire project. So to set that number, to set the minimum at a number that right now is at or above that threshold based on current market conditions at which the whole project doesn't pencil, is just not something we can go along with. It puts us in a situation where no build becomes almost guaranteed.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's probably about as far as we can get in this discussion. And I'm sure you'll continue to be thinking about this, and everyone needs to continue to be thinking about it. I see 3 hands up. Janice, I want you to have a chance to respond first, and then we'll go to Mark and then Blair. You're muted.
You're muted, Janice.
So my husband pays attention to construction innovations, and there's now something called mass timber, which allows you to do a 10-story wood construction that actually is strong enough to withstand earthquakes. So it's supposed to be it's sustainable, lightweight, and a fire-resistant alternative to concrete and steel. So you can actually get up to 10 stories using this product, which would save you some money. But that's one thing. The other thing is that these numbers are actually pretty fungible. And even though it says 66%, that's nowhere near what the commercial would be. This is now a 100% commercial site. So anything below that really diminishes the it as a commercial site. Although I understand that economic conditions are definitely not favorable right now for medical office buildings and other things. It is apparently favorable for restaurants, which keep opening. And I'm hoping that you can find commercial properties that do want to have a presence in Chestnut Hill. There are both the street and Chestnut Hill Square are completely commercial. So anyway, this was a consensus. I wanted to say that I was looking for a pathway for this to pass at town meeting. There is an art to passing zoning at town meeting. Zoning has failed to reach the 2/3 threshold. And so I am getting calls from neighborhoods from town meeting members wanting to know how the neighborhood feels. And I really want to be able to present something that will pass at town meeting. So that is why I work I've been working really hard on what I see as a consensus approach to getting you what you want and need, and also having a sense that the neighborhood has, you know, is being respected. This is a huge ask of the neighborhood. This is a very this is a middle income neighborhood. This is not a high end neighborhood. So, you know,
I
that's it.
guess, I guess
Well,
one, can
sorry,
I
Michael,
ask
go ahead.
Janice one question? Because
Yeah.
like she's presenting this on behalf of the neighborhood, which I appreciate. And I guess the question I have is for the project as it stands now, you know, you and I have talked about sort of the risk profile of like whether or not this project will get built. And you know what would make it more or less likely to be built. And one of the things that I'm trying to understand from you is whether you think the current project in its current configuration is itself worthwhile in it, just as it's been described, you know, the 14-12-7 program, the hotel, the condos, the medical office space, et cetera. And I mean, I understand how adjusting the numbers changes things. But what I'm trying to understand is your intention, are you trying to change the numbers in order to make any outcome more likely, or are you trying to change the numbers in order to change this specific project from something other than it is?
That's an excellent question, and I thank you for asking it. No, I mean, I would like, you know, I think I've grown accustomed to this configuration now. I'm not going to fight the configuration of 14-12-7. I know that the percentages themselves really are deceiving. That's not exactly how much commercial we're getting versus housing here. And I know that the town needs both. And I also know that we're right now, according to the latest figures I've had, that the developer is close to is over 63%. So I think to get to that extra few percentage points, um, I think there are creative ways to get there to enhance building A. And no, I'm okay with the current configuration.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
So I think there's obviously some more work to be done offline. To
Can I make a comment on that point?
sorry, I don't know who is speaking.
It's Mark
Mark.
Zarella.
Oh, Mark, sorry, I was about to call on you, Mark, with your hand raised. Go
Okay.
ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was essentially going to talk about the buyout comment that was made about the trees. And I think that's a, another situation where the consequences are not really thought about reasonably, because they could have a buyout of close to $500,000 on the trees that are on that site right now. I'm talking about this through experience. I've done 5 tree protection permits in the town so far, and the buyouts are just crazy. And what's more important, I think, would be to make sure that there's a landscape plan and a rebuild, and that we should actually make sure that the tree protection zoning bylaw somehow, you know, gives this project a pass, so that we could get good urban spaces with reasonable plantings, and we don't have to overplant the whole lot because we have to try and mitigate by replanting rather than buyout. So that's one comment. And the other comment I want to make is on the transportation. And it's interesting that you brought up the point just now about the project configuration, because in my opinion, I think that there's probably any number of more project configurations that could actually be reasonable for this site. Maybe not with this developer, but with other developers. And I'm just talking about changing the configuration based on changes that might be required for transportation improvements. Now think about that. If we're allowing the other block, I can't remember what we call the middle block, to exit onto Heath Street, but we don't allow this block to exit onto Heath Street, then we're limiting our circulation possibilities. We're pushing development to have on-site circulation, etc. So, I just think that I don't buy it. Okay, I've been doing this too long to buy that there's not another configuration that is not only feasible, financially feasible, and also can solve some of these transportation issues, and at the same time, give some relief towards, this tree protection buyout, because it's basically extortion the way I see it. I mean, you're doing a completely different development here, and you're going to have to pay for trees that were required, or that were basically planted for a different type of development.
So
And
just to
so
be clear, it's the town's requirements that are extortion. It's not that the developer is extorting anything. I was just
Yeah,
want to make sure
that's
that we have the
clear.
right guilty party.
No, that's clear. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
You're right.
Right. And
You're
Mark,
right.
I want
So-
to make, I'm sorry, when you're done, I
Go
want to
ahead,
make
Mike.
two points.
Sorry,
No,
Mark, are you done?
I forgot what I was going to say. Go
That's
ahead.
all right. Comes with the territory. Michael.
Yeah, so I was going to make 2 points. Number one is that the change that Janice proposed and Ken Lewis proposed also has to do with specifically a buyout provision for the tree canopy. Now, I have had previous conversations with both City Realty and growth companies, and it turns out that because of the open space, the landscaped open space requirements and the other capacity for putting trees within 1,000 feet of the site, that buyout provision, that section 15D, is actually not going to be used by either of those two, would be used by either of those two entities. So removing it is actually not an issue. The thing that you're referring to, hold
I
on,
don't understand
hold
that.
on,
Can you
hold
say
on.
that again?
Well, Mark,
Sure.
just wait, okay?
Yeah.
Just a second.
Okay. So the point that I wanted to make is that there are two different provisions and two different sections of law, of the bylaw, potentially referring to trees. One is the tree protection bylaw that is already established in the town, and that's what I think you are referring to. And the other is the tree canopy provisions that are in the zoning, which Janice Kahn and Ken Lewis pointed out that there's a buyout provision for specifically, which I think the developers and the town and Janice and Ken have all agreed can be removed appropriately. So I think to your point about whether or not this is extortion, aside from adding the fact that there is also a landscape plan requirement that is in the memorandum of agreement between City Realty and the town, so they will be providing a landscape plan as part of the building permit process. The question of the tree preservation bylaw is separate, and at this point, sort of outside the purview of this project. And I don't think we can even legally entertain a provision that violates an existing bylaw.
Yeah.
I mean, I would check with council on that, but I think that would require some sort of change to the tree protection bylaw in order to be able to entertain it.
If you want to be assured that this doesn't pass, you would touch that third rail.
Well, I understand that you rationalizing this to a T here, but I still think that there are unintended consequences of all of this related to what you just allowed to happen and what probably will happen when you go through the review process. Because I can't imagine that you're going to rebuild on this site and keep any of these trees at all that are there now.
That,
you're
and
gonna
that's,
have to,
and that's the bylaw that passed a couple of years ago. At town meeting, it calls for it calls for a penalty for, or a fee for.
Or replantings, you know, there's
Yeah.
very.
Yeah, replanting.
it's a
Yep,
quagmire.
okay, Cliff, you had a comment?
Yeah, well, I was just to follow up on that point. Yeah, so as Michael mentioned before, we are currently planning to comply with the tree bylaw with on-site replantings, and there are a few areas we've identified where we are working to try to keep some existing trees, but there are, as you mentioned, there's a number where it's just not feasible in any real configuration of this project, and so we are planning to conform. You know, I appreciate the desire for more compromise. You know, as I said, we've tried to pick our battles where we and give where we can afford to give, and that I think that just underlining why, like, when we say we can't
Well,
make something work, I
I
get a little bit of credibility when I say that.
yeah, I can tell you that unless you've actually worked on a tree protection application, that you really don't know what you're in for.
I mean,
And we're not talking about just, you know, leaving a tree here or there, because if you leave
No,
a tree, it has a tree save area, a root protection zone, and you can't
two-year look back.
build around it, and you can't deal with it. So you're going to take every single tree down on that site, no question about it. Otherwise, the constructability of the project is in question. So I'm just saying that, you know, we should take these things in stride and try and, you know, accommodate things both ways. Okay, we are accommodating what the town wants, and we need to accommodate what the developer would want, and that means any developer, not just, you know, City Realty, anybody who's going to do anything in that area.
Yeah.
But I tend to agree with Michael that it can't be addressed at this particular level, right? It's a separate bylaw that's already been passed, so it's something that we'll have to deal with after. And believe me, I understand what you're talking about,
Yeah,
Mark.
and
I work
yeah,
on
I
those.
agree with you.
Yeah.
All right, anything else? I think we've covered what I wanted to cover pretty well. Janice,
Linda's
and then
waving.
Linda, do you want?
Linda wants to
comment on that?
speak. Linda hasn't made a comment yet.
Go ahead, Linda. You have to unmute.
Sorry,
Unmute. There you go.
you can't see my hand because my wall is yellow. It's the same color. I just wanted to clarify something. Cliff, I thought I heard you say that you might be willing to go down to 12 stories from 14 as the you know the tallest. Is that, did I hear that correctly?
Yes, so that, I mean, and I think if there are any changes to the commercial threshold needed to get to 14, that would be almost guaranteed. That would be essentially guaranteed that we would be lowering that building to 12.
Linda, are you familiar with the 12-12-7 proposal that came out several weeks ago?
Well, I didn't know if it was still on the table.
Well, the answer to that question is, in the case where 14 stories can't be built, yes, it would be on the table. The challenge with that is that it actually ends up with a lower commercial percentage than the 14-12-7 program, because it substitutes several floors of medical office space for residential.
Okay, and that's non-negotiable.
Well,
It's part of that 12-12-7 program. It's part of what makes the economics of that program possible.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. That's actually a helpful question and a useful discussion back and forth. Thank you. Carla, one more. We're actually at 8 o'clock, which is only 30 minutes longer than we're supposed to go. Go ahead. Yeah,
You're muted, Carla.
Yeah.
Sorry. That last comment reminded me of my weekly or monthly or whatever question about third-party review. How are we proceeding on that?
A third-party review of.
So, yep, so Carla, we are working on bringing on not one, but two consultants to do a couple of financial feasibility analyses and peer review work. So I don't have an exact update. Kara's been working on bringing those consultants on board, but I would hope, at some point over the next couple of weeks, we'll be able to have those as a point of reference.
Thank
So just as a reminder, that's I've forgotten the name of the woman who was our consultant.
Pam
for-
McKinney.
Pam McKinney.
And thank
Yeah.
you very much, Pam McKinney.
Yeah.
A replacement, as if there could ever be one for Pam
Yes.
McKinney.
Well, one of these consultants came under her recommendation, I believe.
Okay,
Good. Thank you.
all right. And with that, Meredith,
I just wanted to add, and Carla had brought this up at the beginning of the meeting, but on the Chestnut Hill Commercial Area Study webpage, we've updated it with links to all of the special town meeting warrant articles. We're going to work on having an FAQs page, but we're also going to try to keep the most current information about upcoming public hearings. So we have 4 of those posted on the webpage now, so you can send people there for the most up-to-date info.
okay, thank you.
Michael, can I just say one just final thing?
Go
I
ahead,
just,
Bobby,
just about the I don't want anybody to leave this call thinking that City Realty hasn't done their due diligence when it comes to traffic. We have VHB, Randy Price, who's a principal there, talking with DOT. We've met with DOT. There's been a lot of conversations and a lot of money spent ahead of time to ensure that we have a comfort level moving forward. So this isn't us just saying, hey, wait till later and we'll deal with it later. This is us with VHB, probably, I don't have to tell you, Michael, one of the top ones in the state that
Yeah.
deals with this, and we feel very comfortable moving forward.
Okay. All right, that's a very good note to end on, Michael. We can cash back in the ticket that we had to Riyadh and go back to work on this.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all. Appreciate the
night.
time.
Thank you. Have a good night.